Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. It's our first episode of OpsTalks presented by Rentley. And for our first episode, we have a wonderful guest. He's the founder of a wonderful real estate software company. You may have heard of them, called Rentley. They power self-guided tours and smart home nationwide. I personally have known him for almost 10 years now. And if you want to learn some of the fun stories about how a guy in LA helped build a large PropTech company, this is your podcast, and really excited and honored to introduce CEO of Rentley, Merrick Lackner. Merrick, welcome to our first episode of OpsTalks, sponsored by you.
Well, it's exciting to be here. I look forward to a fun conversation and delving into the journey and everything we're doing.
Yeah, no, excited to have you. And to give the audience, I know it's our first episode, some idea of what we do is we really try to make an entertaining but informational podcast. So, part of what we'll talk about today is your story, how you became the CEO of Rentley, and just some fun stories to share along the way. I know we've had quite a lot in the Rolodex of storytelling of how we've seen the journey of Rentley and some fun things that we've experienced. So, really excited to have you on.
So ever since I was a kid, I've always been interested in business and finance, and just growing up would follow the stock market at 12, 13, 14 years old. And that's how I learned about balance sheets and what companies do and how they operate. So that dream to run a business and build something was always something that excited me. Felt very empowering, and it's something I've always wanted to do. I lived in China for several years, but moving to the part where after I was done with China and UC Berkeley, I wanted to start a company, and I needed somebody with great technical prowess, somebody who was a technologist that could actually execute on business. And one of the things that I had found in the years prior is that, and I think folks that are starting companies will probably find this, is you'll meet a lot of tech people out there, and a lot of them will talk, but very few can actually build and get something really fully to launch.
Yep.
And so that was something that was experienced, just learning about the industry, learning about technology, learning about websites, learning about platforms. And Clark was special. When we first had our coffee, I asked him, hey, I cold reached out to him on LinkedIn, and he tells the story really good. According to his version, I said, do you want to start a company together? And that was the opening line.
That you said to him.
According to him. I haven't looked back at the original, but I would...
And his response was...
Who are you?
Who are you? Which is my favorite story. I had no idea who you were. And that's such a Clark response. Future episode of OpsTalks, by the way. But yeah, he just...
Yeah, I don't know what I was doing at the time. If I was just sending 1,000 messages, do you want to start a company?
You probably were, knowing you.
I don't know. But so it was, so we met at the Starbucks. And originally, actually, the idea was a little bit different. I being interested in finance, that's why I prefaced with that, is... I wanted to start a site where people could share financial ideas. And actually, there's actually...
So you knew you wanted to start something.
100%,
you just
but we weren't sure.
And you knew Clark was a good candidate, but you didn't know what.
And we hadn't known that it was going to be the rental market at the time.
So you thought, first initial idea is, hey, something financial. I used to love stocks. Let me see if I can do something there.
Right, exactly right.
So you were pitching Clark.
100%. I was pitching Clark. And there's actually a lot of companies
very apropos, by the way, if you know the both of them.
There's a lot of companies that I've actually have Seeking Alpha is an example of a financial community that's actually become quite successful. StockTwits, it became like a Twitter corollary for sharing financial ideas. But at the time, when you go back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it really was not as developed. People were still talking on forums and stuff.
Right.
And so I talked to Clark about that. He just didn't like the idea. He's like, nah, I don't see an ecosystem here. Is what he told me. And that was our first meeting. But there was something I could tell. He had a special zing. Mr. Clark Lee had a special zing to him that really, for me, it resonated because it was clear that he was different and that he could actually build technology.
Right.
Just having talked to people in the past.
Yeah.
And this would be just advice for anybody who's starting a company. You really need to understand who you're going to work with because there's a lot of talk and not everybody can actually go and execute.
Right.
But it was clear that he knew his stuff and he had real world experience. And so he didn't like the first idea and he shot it down. And a couple of weeks later, I reached back out and said, let's go out for coffee again.
Mm-hmm.
And this was back right after the housing market had collapsed in
Surprised.
2008.
Okay.
So we were meeting in 2010, 2011.
Yep.
And it was very much a renter's market, and I was a renter at the time, but it was still hard to find a place to rent and actually see properties.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, Clark, why don't we? And this was the kind of the first iteration of what we did.
Sure.
Why don't we build a platform where if a renter is moving from Los Angeles to San Francisco, they can put that up online.
Yep.
And then the San Francisco landlord could say, hey, Clark, hey, Merrick, you've said that you're moving to San Francisco. I've got the perfect place for you. So we tried to invert the way that people search for rental homes with a rental request going out first saying, hey, I'm looking for this kind of a place, and then allow the landlord or manager. And for that, he thought it was innovative enough that he wanted to give it a try.
Right.
So we just agreed to partner on a company.
Yep.
And that was the first platform idea that we had.
Mm-hmm.
But it ultimately wasn't successful, but that's what led to self-showing.
Gotcha. And so you mentioned something interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, two things. You mentioned a great piece of advice for anyone starting a company is definitely get involved with the person that you're going to eventually, share a partnership with.
Verify that they've got a track record actually building.
Right.
Because there's excellent, technologies of a vast sphere, right? And you've got to make sure to holistically execute on building something is very difficult. Even if you are trained as an engineer in one area.
Yeah.
But to holistically execute it's a special quality trait, which is why you see so many people having a hard time finding a technical co-founder.
Right. And I guess the second question I would have is you sort of, yada, 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 something really important, which is you went to China, which is not a normal path for a kid who grows up in LA, studying finance as a kid. Like, what prompted this big change to go to China? Not many kids I knew in LA said, Andre, what I want to do is go to China. What prompted that whole journey?
100%. When I was 17, I had the opportunity to go out with my aunt and uncle for a summer there.
Okay.
And this was
Where
back
in China?
Shanghai.
Shanghai, okay.
This was back in the year 2001, 2000.
Oh, okay.
That time frame. This was really just when China was coming out of the previous season of leadership and moving more towards free market economies. And it was really a special thing to see. If anyone ever imagined being in New York in the 1920s, that's what Shanghai was like in the year 2000. You would have lily pads on one side and skyscrapers being built next door, and you'd have open markets, old school style from 1,000 years ago, almost literally old school market where you walk down the lanes and the little vendors are all lined up, and then you got a skyscraper going up, and it was just that contrast. And again, being interested in building and business, it had a special energy. So I wanted to be there after high school. So UC Berkeley was kind enough to defer my admission for a year. They said I could go there for studies, which I did. I went there for a year. I studied Chinese, and then. Are you
able to still speak Chinese?
Yeah, I still speak it with my wife, my kids.
Okay, so you still practice it
100%.
So it hasn't been lost.
No, not lost at all. And it's actually serendipitous or God's grace, however you view the world, because we have operations in China today, in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
So it's really fortunate that skill set and experience is there. But going back to UC Berkeley, they deferred my admission for a year. I went back because I had promised my mom I would hold the spot, because she said, you cannot just not go to college.
I would imagine that would be.
But I really wanted to just not go to university altogether.
You didn't even want to go.
No, I didn't want to go. That's the truth.
But Mama Lackner said, you
better keep your spot. So look, it ended up working out.
As a good mother should.
She did. And then, so that was I did 6 months at UC Berkeley, and then I went back to China for 5 years. But Mom was right, because I wasn't successful in China trying to pursue opportunities, and
you weren't successful.
Was not. No. In fact,
what lessons did you learn from that whole Chinese experience? I mean, that's a really important thing that you went through. And how's that ingrained you today into building a business? Like, what did you learn from that whole experience?
Well, I think it gave me a real deep appreciation for the United States. I think if there's a place that somebody wants to start a business,
Yeah.
and this is why so many people want to come here. I mean, we are just so blessed to have such a beautiful system, structure, a constitution, set of rules, and the entrepreneurial spirit here is quite alive. So you can't. It's much easier to start something from scratch here and succeed, just based on the innovative spirit and the infrastructure and the rules that we have in place. And I think that's something that most people would agree on. I mean, you look at General Motors, right? For example, they partnered with the Shanghai Automotive Company, and just in the Wall Street Journal last week, they're writing off $5 billion, right? So if one of the biggest automobile manufacturers in the world can't make money there, it's not easy for a small guy. But it was an exploration for me because again, going back to New York, 1920, I just wanted to be there. It didn't, whether I was going to be successful or not was less important. I just wanted to be in that place in that time. And again, I'm happy that I was there.
Cool.
And then I had gone back. So Mom was right. I held my spot. After my time in China, I went back to UC Berkeley, finished it, and that's where I told you the story about connecting with Clark.
Yep.
And we iterated, we pivoted to self-showing.
You didn't get it right the first time, right? I know there were several, and this is sort of, I tell your story at conferences too, because I think it's important, right? Is a lot of founders are so focused on one thing to deliver on, and they almost don't take what I would call a customer-centric approach, meaning they force a solution, right? Build things up, pour VC money into it, and really it's not received well. I feel like that was the opposite case with you guys. You were, I feel like, open-minded. You started a couple things before you landed on self-showing.
Right.
And I think that's super important to really be able to adapt and pivot when needed, especially early on when you're starting a company.
100%.
Maybe you could talk to the audience a little bit about that journey.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that was actually a fascinating journey. And we were talking to some marketing folks that we're working with recently, and they were asking, what book really influenced you and Clark? And I did recall it at the time when we were starting Rentley. Clark brought me this book and said, it was the Lean Startup.
Okay.
And Clark said, we need to follow this MVP road. And he was he was
The book is called Lean Startup?
The Lean Startup.
Okay.
It's a famous book.
Okay.
About building out MVP products, but he was evangelical about it in terms of his desire for us to follow it.
Click our Amazon referral link below. We get 10% for every sale. We don't. So go ahead.
But what's really cool is, going back to the stories, we went at the time. Everybody knows Jason Calacanis now. Yeah. I've never met him. I've never spoken to him, but he was holding startup gatherings, meetings.
Oh, in LA.
In LA.
Okay.
And this was before he had invested, I think, in Uber and many of his great success stories. So we were on the ground there with him too.
Really?
And, looking back, I'm not sure. Like, he was so animated and out there. It's like, you wouldn't have necessarily known that he was going to be so successful, right? It's just an amazing thing to see. But so we had the book, The Lean Startup, and Clark's like, it says in the book that we've got to pivot or iterate, and we don't have a platform play here. So if we don't pivot, my wife says I should pivot back to doing my old job. I was getting paid. And now I'm sitting home all day with you.
Right.
And not making any money, bro. So what's it going to be? And so it was clear we had to pivot. It wasn't an iteration thing. It was pivot.
So what was the idea that didn't work? You mentioned
the platform of saying I'm moving to.
So the platform you're referencing, the one you referenced earlier, where it's hey, I want to match landlords.
I match landlords. I'm moving from LA to San Francisco. Can you fill my vacancy? Gotcha. And then the landlords.
So that was not working.
Not working. In fact,
did you make any money?
No, nothing.
Nothing.
No, we lost money, actually.
What was the biggest blocker to that idea flourishing, in your opinion?
It was and it taught us our most important lesson is that don't try to go out and affect behavioral change, right? Look for areas that people already do things and use technology to improve that process.
Got it.
Whereas here we were trying
The
to flip.
psychology lift was too high
too
for
high.
people to actually embrace. The landlord was not going to Tinder their next resident. It's not
Exactly.
normative.
No.
Too big of a lift psychologically.
Right.
Didn't work.
It inverted the process. Right now,
Yeah.
you go out, you see a place,
Sure.
you apply, the manager runs you through the verification,
Got
the
it.
qualification process, and then they ultimately decide whether or not to accept you as a tenant based on the process that's in place.
Gotcha.
And we were trying to say, oh, renter, go into San Francisco, have 5 landlords say, I got the spot for you.
Bid on you.
Right.
So that didn't work.
It didn't work, no.
So then did you go from that idea right to self-showing?
No, there was one stop in between.
Okay.
And I think our first $99 in revenue helped keep Clark a few more months.
Oh,
So
okay.
I
you
was,
had a second thing that earned you
was
$99.
video tours.
Video tours.
And there was this
video tours is now quite a large.
By the way, there was a company that had later tried to invert the paradigm like we did, and they did not succeed, and they put tens of millions of dollars into it.
So someone tried to restart the first idea that you guys started, and it didn't,
With big money.
with a lot of more money.
Without MVP.
Gotcha.
Without the lean startup. So, this...
And you had $0. Like, just to clarify for the audience too, your first idea, you were essentially investing your time. You didn't have VC
It was
funding.
essentially our time. I mean, the partnership
Yeah.
with Clark, we each put in $20,000.
Okay, you did put money.
We each put in
so
$20,000.
you bootstrapped. You put in a bit of coin.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
But it was all your own. You didn't do a big
And
raise.
we lost most of it on building that platform.
Sure.
Because we were just working for a year, and so
So you invested, built the platform,
Yes.
just didn't have any adoption.
no adoption. And then Clark's wife says it's time to quit.
Time to quit. I need
So then I start
We got
mad
bills to
calling.
pay,
I
yeah.
start mad calling all the landlords in Los Angeles because
you start carpet bombing them.
by the way, that's one of the funnest periods of time
Yeah.
for the sales side is the build stage because you
Right.
just get to sit around and fantasize about how great things are going to be.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do anything because nothing's ready to be sold. It's like, well, Clark, when's it going to be ready? Great, check in with you next week. You know, So
Right. It's easy.
It's easy, and you just get to sit in fantasy mode. It's like having that super lotto ticket in hand, just fantasizing about being the winner the next day.
Right.
But I started mad calling landlords.
So and this is the first idea or the second idea?
No. The platform didn't succeed.
So, okay, so then you went to the second idea.
Then he says, Merrick, I gotta go if we're not gonna do something here.
Right.
And so I start mad dash calling landlords saying, well, we could do video tours, Clark. Let's just do video tours.
Okay, so this was then you went right into the video tour
And
idea.
I got this one landlord, I don't remember his name, but I just kept calling him, and I think he felt sorry for me. He's like, I think it's a charity. He wrote me a $99 check
Yep.
to do the video tours for his home.
Wow.
Literally probably was a charity, reflecting back.
Yeah.
It was a charity. It's like this guy's...
Guy said, hey, take a chance.
He's not panhandling, so let me give him $99 to make the video. And
That's pretty kind.
yeah, it was kind.
You kind of think
But I
about
got to tell you,
Yeah.
Clark just being an MVP follower was elated because now
Someone
we had
paid for it. Someone paid $100.
It followed the rules of the system.
Right.
We got a payment.
got $100.
We got $100. So he was elated. Wow, we have validation here.
That's a market
Whoa,
validation.
That's market validation. Okay, whether it was market validation or not, we'll leave that to the viewership to decide. But
Comment below to see if
Was
you
it
think-
validation?
Would
And I-
$100 keep
Dude.
you going after sinking $40,000 into a startup?
yeah, so it kept him going because we were, Clark is
incredible.
rules oriented, and this followed the rule. We had
Right.
got validation.
So it's kind of, in a way, that $100 sort of kept
But it did.
probably Rentley
But ultimately, it got us
going.
into this mind meld of what is the touring process about.
Right.
And that's when we awoke in as Rentley. We woke up to the Rentley concept of, wait a second, we can let people forget video tours.
Yeah.
This was when Research in Motion and BlackBerry, they had a big portion of the market, but they were declining. They were dying from their 50%, 40%, 30%, 20% market share. Android and Apple, you go back and look at the charts, 2010, 2011, 2012. This is when they were just really in surge stage, much like AI is today.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, we can let people into homes all by themselves.
Right.
And I had, at the time, going back, when I had come back after my visit to China and not succeeding there, I drove up from mom's house in LA to just see 2 apartment units owned by one landlord. And I saw for rent signs, maybe even closer to the school, that would have been nicer, but I couldn't get in. And I only had a window of 4 or 5 hours to find a place, you turn down and go home. And I was going home because when I went back, I had already had Henny, our first daughter, and I was married, so I wasn't going to spend time up there searching for days.
Right.
So I gave the deposit check in hand and said, I'll be back in 2 weeks. School starts. And from that realization really led Clark and I, it was like the light bulb went off. We're going to let people into homes on their own. And that's where the journey began. And I knew it. At that point, I knew it. There was a resolve. And there was just this knowledge. This is going to work. Because we had, having gone through there's no reason. And again, learning from the prior experience, this wasn't a behavioral change.
Yeah.
This was just taking what people already do.
Right.
And just magnifying it with technology.
Right.
And this is a big piece of advice to anybody that's starting a company and technology or in other spheres. Find an area where you could just incrementally improve.
Right.
And maybe sometimes that incremental improvement's a lot more than you realize, and it's still within the same behavior. That's where opportunities lie.
Just to give the audience the sense of growth at Rentley in the past, it's been around for what, 13 years?
Yeah.
It started with you two and really just an idea. How has Rentley scaled since then? Like, give us an idea of the size of the company.
So starting the business, we would facilitate entry into homes, self-showing, on a high-tech lockbox.
Yeah.
Third-party high-tech lockbox.
Yeah.
But we long knew that we would want to build out our own hardware systems. And today, Rentley builds out and designs all the key hardware-centric components that go into access for a home, for residents, which is self-showing, for vendors, for maintenance crews, and for continued use during residency once the renter moves in. And that includes the access panel, the hub that controls the entire home, the main lock.
So it evolved from self-guided touring to like, hey, access control, which the resident can experience through the life cycle. Yeah.
So there's smart hardware and there's smart software.
Right.
And the two are married. And the company's expanded. We took our first. We had an angel investor in the early days that we synced up with maybe a year or two into running the business, and then a couple years ago, and we bootstrapped for about 10 years. And bootstrapping, we took the company global. We had several offices in India and in China, and the United States. And then since we've taken on additional funding from our partner McCarthy Capital several years ago, we've expanded about 500 folks throughout the world with 6 or 7 offices in India throughout all the really key technology development zones, as well as Shenzhen for hardware. And then here in California, we've got 3 offices. So we did a lot bootstrapped, and then we were very fortunate to find our capital partners to help us expand with large enterprise clients in the 2020s.
How do you build culture, right? It's not an easy question, but I'm just curious, like, what values that you try to instill in Rentley, and how do we propagate that globally? How does a founder scaling a company with now, I mean, you went from, and when I started with the company with you, it was 10 guys in a room, right? 10 guys and 1 girl in a sales office. And then there was a couple engineers and,
well, tell us about how did you get to Rentley?
Well, but this is about you, right? So like the question I would have is, it's easy, I think, right, for you to maintain a culture when it's 10 or 11 people in one room, right? And this was, 2015 when I had started, and the interesting thing that I find is you expand globally. COVID happened, a lot more people are remote. How do you personally feel that culture is maintained, right? How do you make sure that a company's aligning to the values that you want it to have?
Right. That's a very interesting question. I think most companies, and this is also a commonly taught theme throughout the journey of most companies, especially in technology, but it's got truth to it, is when you're bootstrapping and you have so few resources, a lot of what is culturally holding together a company is that kinship, friendship, and that camaraderie of going out and doing something really difficult together as a group that everybody against all odds, thinks you can't do, but you end up seeing through and accomplishing. And then as you grow bigger and bigger and bigger, it definitely becomes a challenge. How do you maintain that kinship? How do you maintain that camaraderie while actually adding more structure?
Right.
And because you may not need the most structure in the world with a dozen or 2 dozen or even 3 dozen people, but
Right.
you need structure with 500 people.
Yeah.
And you need to be direct, and you need to be non-avoidant. It's kind of it's an interesting dynamic because in a certain sense, you know, when I was first starting Rentley, I used to be very protective, and a lot of people say, and Clark was actually right about this because he would say, "I shouldn't worry so much about the ideas, you know, whatever." But I was very protective about everything.
Yeah. Because it's sort of your baby.
Right. It's like your baby.
You
And it's
kind of
very,
protect
very
it.
protective about, you know, how we're doing, what do our financials look like.
Right.
I mean, you get so worried that these little things are going to matter. And so on the one hand, just with starting with a small group, you know, sure, I was very protective, but there was a kinship and a camaraderie, right? And then it's interesting how companies and people evolve, because as the company has grown, we've added more structure. So, you know, things can't be as willy-nilly, but actually there's this realization that you don't need to be as protective about things as people would think that you need to be.
Yeah.
So the way you kind of balance the loss of that initial small friend group is just by being more open,
Yeah.
by being more direct. Like our directors, VPs, whomever, you know, they can go in and look at the financials. It's not a secret, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you start opening up more.
So
And
transparency, you would
while
find,
you might
is a
not
key
be able
thing.
to put your hand over everybody's shoulder,
Yeah.
information starts to flow more freely.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, great kinships and friendships are maintained, but I've increasingly over my learnings here become more open, less avoidant. And I think that's how you keep the culture together is you really just have to move towards the transparency model, and it's a balance. You want to keep the original DNA of a business, and for us, it's hard work, it's grit in the day to day, while at the same time putting structure in place. And I think the best way to put structure in place and hold a company together is by being really open about what's happening with the team, and with the development and with the vision.
That's awesome. Another question I would have for you is you have a wife and you have how many children again?
You know.
I'm asking for that.
How many kids
you have
do
4
I have?
children.
There we go.
Right?
If you didn't know how many kids we have, we got a problem, Andre.
My question
talking about
is,
friendship and kinship here, and you're worried you might say it wrong.
So you have 4 kids, you have a wife, you obviously have a family that's of significant size, right? And that takes time and energy.
You got 3, yep.
I got 3, but you trump me, of course. You got 4, right? And so I guess the question
Well, you could still have one more.
I could still have one more. I don't know if I have any
Then
more.
we'll be on even footing. But anyways, go ahead.
But my question is, and I mean, I have this challenge too, is how do you balance the two? I mean, a lot of probably listeners and watchers also have, you know, children, families. You're a founder. You have the joke I tell people is, you know, I have 500 kids at home, right? And so it's like you have to dedicate time to things. I mean, even filming this episode, we were kind of bouncing back and forth on whether we had the time to do it, but obviously we're here and we want to do it. But how do you maintain that balance with work life? Is there a balance? I mean, this is a common theme I hear. You recall the who was it? The CEO of what was the company? Was it Chipotle or was it Starbucks? The old Starbucks CEO, I think I got critiqued because he said, I don't work after 6 o'clock, right? And there was a lot of fallout from that.
Sure.
But on both sides, right? Because there was critics that said, hey, you need to maintain some sort of work-life balance. The guy's being overly critiqued. But then other people are like, hey, you're running a publicly traded company. Like, there's no really such thing as work-life balance. I think to your credit, you do a really good job of trying to balance the two, right? I feel like you do a good job of being attentive to your kids. I see you at events, but you're also, you're on call. I don't think I've ever called you and you haven't picked up. How do you balance those two?
Unless I'm taking a nap because we got so taken out during a hard week, right?
Even then, you've picked up the phone call. You were a little groggy, but you picked it up.
No, it's an interesting question. I think most certainly in the early days. I mean, look, I would say that for me personally, the balance was harder to strike in the early days, meaning just getting started because so much was riding on just on us being successful. I mean, and I mean that in the sense of my ability to pay rent at the time, going back 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So paying rent, buying food, providing for the family. I mean, that was all on the line going back 10 years ago. So at that point, I would say that there wasn't the greatest balance. I've always been, I think one thing that I've always done to maintain the balance has just been within close physical proximity of my family, of my kids.
Yeah.
So even if I wasn't there in mind, I was there by them physically, and they knew what I was doing. They knew what I was working, and that especially if you rewind again, going back 7 to 10 years ago, I think the family knew why I had to be on those calls, even if it was weekend. They may not have liked it, but I was there, and I was within physical proximity. And then I think I think part of it is part of just getting older and growing as a human being. You get more, and also part of it is time, and obviously we've seen some success. So more comfort comes with time, and you learn how to turn off as needed, and you learn how to be more discerning in what truly requires time.
Yeah.
So now it is easier for me to just put my phone down and be with the kids. More so than the early days.
I think you have a point too, but actually not to interrupt you, but I think one of the things I'm hearing and kind of resonates in my head is you said earlier, the key to a good culture is transparency, right? I think the same applies when you're basically sharing a professional life with your personal life. Like my wife knows exactly what I do, and she'll call me out too, like what's on your mind. I'll tell her, and I think that's key when you're sharing that information with your family, even like, hey, I mean, I've even talked to your kids. They even know what's going on at Renly, which is great, right? Like it's. I think that's part of how you can balance the two too, is just having that radical transparency of, hey, this is what's happening. This is why I'm working late. I'm going to be home late. The joke I tell people is, I try to maintain a really good NPS score with my family and just get ahead of anything. Like,
well, radical transparency is important. I mean, I'll tell you one thing just about being the fathers. I will talk to my kids about anything under the sun.
Right.
I don't have any boundaries, candidly. But I think for me that works because there's nothing for them to hide from me. As like I remember growing up, I didn't want to tell my parents everything.
Right.
I have a relationship with my kids where I'm so open that there's really nothing that's off limits. Yeah. Candidly. So it's and everything can be talked about comfortably. Everything under the sun, and then, but. People like you asked me, how do you maintain a work-life balance? And I think a lot of people think that there's a canned answer. And the reality is, and I just want to highlight, there is none. I think it really, how one handles that largely depends on where they are at in their life. So going back to 5 to 10 years, rewind. If anybody's being raw and real, if you're starting a business and you don't have any money to pay the rent, well, you're going to have a hard time balancing it. You're going to be picking up calls when you're around your family. That's the truth. And so to me, I said, the way that I balanced that was just being in physical proximity. I wasn't absent, because a lot of people will be absent. But to say that you won't have trouble balancing it, there's not a canned answer like, self-help book, you'll read it, and I got my Zen, now I can have the balance. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. There's multiple variables at play. So, as Renly becomes more successful, as we grow, I obviously have more comfort and have more of the ability to start discerning what requires my attention. Right. But that was something earned over time. Yeah. It didn't come at the get-go. Yeah. And I would say for anybody to have a good life balance, I would say there's probably some earnings that go into it over time. And as you grow older, you then have that ability to discern, well, is this important or not? But it's going to be a result of multiple variables that led you there. It's not there's not a quick fix for everybody, whether you're starting your career or a CEO or a VP, that that's the life balance trick. Yeah. It's not like that. Humans are complex creatures.
I like to say that being in PropTech as a vendor, it's like dog years, meaning it's such a interesting industry where I think people have heard. It's such an interesting industry because you're providing software to real estate, very competitive landscape, and Renly's been doing this for 13 years now, and we've seen boom cycles, we've seen cycles of stagnant growth, everything in between. you service residents, you service managers. 13 years, the joke, 13 times 7 is quite a long time, right? 70 plus years. I joke because it does really feel like there's so much that happens in the space and so much work you put into it. Going, now with 2025 and beyond, the question I would ask you is what hasn't changed so much? You've been in the space for 13 years, which I would consider a long time in real estate tech. What do you see as something that's not really changed as much as you had anticipated?
Well, a lot of the same people, I'd say. I think that's one thing that's so unique about real estate, and that's why it's so relational. I mean, when you look to other companies in the PropTech space, and I always talk to, and I even tell my kids this. 50% of your success is going to be your competence, which in business terms would be your product, right? What value does your product add? The other 50% is your relationship with others, how you treat others and how they treat you. And this is where morals, ethics, and integrity actually do matter over the long haul, because that 50%, you can't earn a good name. It's not easy to build, and it's what does Warren Buffett
your
say?
Reputation.
It takes years to build, and you lose it, and you can lose it in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
50-50. But the real estate, I think it's a place where there's a lot of people that have really dedicated their lives to the industry. I think that's where it's definitely the same.
And what's interesting too, I don't know if you find this too, but a lot of people, particularly in the space, have been, you're right, they start companies, they leave companies,
but they stay in the space.
They stay in the space. And the other interesting thing I see is that they never thought that they would be in real estate. It was sort of a journey, right? Whether they start like myself and yourself, we didn't start thinking, I didn't grow up and say, I want to be in real estate, real estate tech. And I don't feel like
you were
a lot
doing something with biotech drugs.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people don't, and this is something interesting for people that want to get into real estate tech or prop tech. It's like it's not an undergrad degree you get. You sort of fall into it because you probably are interested in it, or you just find it really interesting, whether it's through the resident journey or through just providing solutions to a renter space. Right? It drives a passion, and you sort of end up in the space. So the people are consistent. Sounds like you see a lot of the familiar faces. What that you didn't expect has been the biggest change?
The biggest change? That's a big question. I think, obviously, just coming from technology, the technology has vastly changed. Like when we launched Rently, it was using a third-party lockbox. Now, there's the actual hardware that wasn't even conceived of or designed at the time exists. So I think there's a technology revolution that's happening within real estate, and that's why so many people are excited about PropTech. And looking out to future years with Matter and all kinds of new protocols coming into fore. But the real estate space is also very conservative and judicious in its judgment application for what's going to be long-lasting and not obsolescent. So I think technology for sure has had a big impact, and we know that through COVID, self-showing played a huge role, where people were able. I mean, that was really our moment. We've always had our eye on multifamily, and you know that, right, Andre? And COVID was that time where it's like, okay, the phones were ringing off the hook, saying we need this, we need this, we need to get people in hours. Without agents, because of the health concerns. So technology is definitely where it's at, and that's what's so exciting is coming into work every day and solving problems, challenges, because that's what work is every day. There's some challenge, some problem, some issue that needs to be addressed. And there's just that meaningfulness in solving problems collaboratively. We do it all the time together.
I remember one of the funniest realizations for us, to your earlier point about people kind of starting to think about smart home, was we would call people, for the first name of our kind of vertical was Rently Keyless. And I remember because the problem at the time was we would call people and say, hey, we have a smart home solution. And the first question was, what the heck is that? Like they didn't even know in 2015 what a smart home solution was. It was just like this weird kind of sci-fi idea of what the heck is a smart home. Now everybody does it. Now everybody does it. And I remember we kind of rebranded it because I remember we were doing these sales pitches and they didn't understand what smart home was, but they understood what keyless meant. So the keyless line sort of resonated with them. I remember we'd go through smart home and we'd say, it's keyless entry locks.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to property manager, and they'd spark up. They'd react to that line, go, "Oh, really? What do you mean?"
Yeah.
And that was the line that would get them to engage.
Yeah.
And we eventually even rebranded it to just say Rentley Keyless,
Right.
which if you Google search, you can probably find old logos.
There's still tags
And
out there.
I remember that that just shows you how the space couldn't adapt to the change quick enough to understand what a smart home was, but we retitled it keyless.
Right.
And it just shows you how far the industry has come in adopting access control, smart home solutions, and self-guided touring.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that was funny when and then we had the conversation about now we can rebrand it back to Rentley Smart Home because now people know what it means.
Those were the good old days.
Those were the good old days
with our cubicles, and we were out there with our picnic tables.
Yeah,
you tell good picnic table stories.
Oh God, I remember.
I like hearing them as much as I like.
Well, I remember
you're better at the picnic table.
Well, the picnic table story. I mean, when I remember walking into the first office. I remember just by serendipity, I was touring an apartment when you cold called me.
Yeah.
I forgot I even applied to a job at Rentley, and
I called you, right?
And you, well, I didn't know it was you at the time. I didn't know it was the founder of the company, but I got a guy calling me, "Hey, this is Merrick Lackner, and you applied to an account executive job." And at that time, I was touring properties in I was Pasadena at the time.
Yeah, it's a little sign from the heavens.
It's so odd that at the moment I am touring an apartment in Pasadena. By the way, this was a day of absolute touring hell. I had scheduled, I think 10 or 18 tours that day. I'm not even kidding. I was on Craigslist. I was on whatever I could find to find an apartment. Because my wife was going into school.
Yeah.
We were trying to move.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I remember we were touring the apartments. We could not book anything. We could not book anything. It was so damn frustrating. It was like we booked 18 showings. No, like half the time the agent didn't show up or the owner had leased it.
Right.
And I was so tired. We'd booked from 8 to 4 straight.
That's why people need Rentley.
Yeah, well, here's the crazy thing is I'm touring an apartment, forgot I even applied. You called me and say, "Hey, this is Merrick Lackner. I'm with a company called Rentley." And
I said my full name, Merrick Lackner.
I think you just said Merrick. I think you said, "Hey, this is Merrick. I'm calling you because you applied to account executive position here at Rentley." And I'd forgotten I applied, and I go, "What the heck is Rentley?" And you're like, "Oh, we're just, we provide smart lock boxes so that, renters can tour a property themselves." And I stopped and I go, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And it was like this light bulb moment where people think I make this up. I swear to God, this is the truth. Like, you called me right, and I was about to start my apartment tour. I remember it was the Eaves in Pasadena. I still even remember the logo. I don't know if they still have that brand, but I was about to start the tour. You said that line and it kind of clicked. Oh my God, they're solving a problem.
Right.
That I'm experiencing now. This is a sign.
Yes.
I don't care what God or truth you believe in, but I was like, I cannot hang up right now.
Signs were there. And
the signs were there. Yeah. And I remember, I'll tell this fun story. I don't think I've told you this, but so you said, "Hey, come and tour the office."
And that's another thing for the audience. Listen to those signs. They're there.
They're signs.
There are signs along the way, but we can't tell you what they are, but they will be there.
And you look back and you're like, "Oh, that was like that was interesting." So I remember you invited me to tour the office. I walked in, and this was in Beverly at the time, the first office we had.
Yes.
This is when we had one like corner suite, not much bigger than the studio.
Yes.
And
this is a small studio.
This is not a big studio, but this is, I remember I was touring, and by the way, I think you forgot that you had me.
That would do that. I just say you'd show up.
You showed up.
Because the hit rate wasn't that.
I showed up.
I had like 70% wouldn't show, so I'd be like, I'm not gonna review you. I'd just be around.
I showed up, and I remember Penny was like, "Oh, who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, Merrick invited me to like see the facility because I actually want to like spot check." Which, by the way, now you probably didn't. To your point, I was like, "Oh, I caught them off guard," because Penny goes, "Oh, okay." And I remember he goes, "Merrick is like doing some personal errand. He'll be back." And you did eventually come back, but interestingly enough, I sat there for like 45 minutes because you had totally forgot. Penny was like, "I don't know what to do with this guy," but he said, "Hey, you can shadow people." right? So for 45 minutes, I just shadowed what you guys were doing. I just talked to the people on the floor.
That's an
At the
interesting
time.
company interview technique. If you're getting started with a business and you're not ready to do the interview, just have the candidate shadow.
I just had, you guys had me shadow, and I started talking with everybody on the floor. And I remember
Learning by fire.
And I was just like, the product was super interesting. The people were awesome, because I remember people, because I was asking, it was my first sales job after business school. And I'm like, I've never cold called anybody.
Right.
And I'm like, what's the support? And I remember everyone on the floor was like, we support you. If you need help, we help each other.
Right.
And I even witnessed it.
Right.
And I remember walking in, and I'm like, well, they have picnic tables, and this is kind of scary to
How
go
did the
into.
picnic tables look from your
They were
vantage?
the Costco fold up
But they
white.
were high quality.
They were not bad.
They were high quality.
They were not bad.
They were that kind that's
They-
like weatherproof, you know?
They weren't like the nasty wooden ones with the chip
No,
top.
they were nice. Graphite.
They were fold up. They were graphite. Yeah. They were
Graphite.
higher
Come
end. They
on.
were Costco.
Yeah, weight
Picnic
sustaining.
tables.
It was great.
So I started talking with the people, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I was like, okay, the product is good, and I'm like, the process could need work, and I'm like, oh, maybe that's where I can help. And so I left the office, and I remember this so vividly at the time. I called my mom up, and I was telling her about the job. And by the way, if you know LA, I lived in Pasadena, and your office was in Beverly Hills.
Right. So you call your mom Anna.
I called my mom, Anna. Yeah, you know, and
You
and
don't
I
know how
called
many
her-
kids I have. I know your mom's name.
I was doing it for the audience.
all
So
right,
now I'm
all
going to
right,
hear
for
about
the
this.
audience.
Now I'm going to hear about this. I know you have 4 kids.
Okay.
Okay. I will not hear the end of this for the next year, by the way. We'll tell more stories in part 2 of this, because there's definitely going to be part 2. But I
Well, it
remember.
depends on how many viewers we get. We can only do it if a bunch of people watch this online. Otherwise, it's not entertaining.
Right. That's like and subscribe.
Yeah.
So.
We know you're liking the content. Like and subscribe below.
Yeah, this is the pitch to like and subscribe. Otherwise, you're not going to hear more of this. But I remember I asked my mom, I said, what do you think I should do? And she says, you're going to commute an hour and a half each way for a job after business school. Don't do it.
You didn't mention the minimum wage part.
Oh, it was $15 an hour. Yeah, that really sold her. She's like, you're commuting an hour and a half for $15 an hour? And I go, yeah, Mom, but it's 50 cents per close after that. And you get a cap after $22.50. You know the old line. Like, yeah, there's $50.
I had a great structure
Yeah,
in
he had a great
place.
structure.
50 cents on the hour.
50 cents on the hour. And I said, all you need is a couple closes. You get up to $22.50 was the cap, I remember. And then there was like another comp plan where it went up to like $200,000 or something, right? And I was like, gosh, the upside is there. But more importantly, I was like, wow. So she said no. So I said, crap, that's not the answer I wanted to hear. And so then I asked my wife, and I go, like, what do you think? And she kind of looks at me, and she goes, take the chance. If it doesn't work out, just move on. And I remember
There's something to be said of a good wife. That's for sure.
she said, take the chance.
Because I'll be honest, my family wasn't super, look, they never,
They were
they would never stop me
careful.
from.
Shira's gonna watch
No,
this.
my wife is supportive. I'm giving her credit, like your wife. I mean, my family would never stop me from pursuing my dreams. Let's put it at that. But they weren't so encouraging of it in the early days. Let's be clear.
Well, they know it's going to take time,
my
right?
parents would have much preferred, as my grandpa, if I had just gone out and gone to college and either studied engineering or been a doctor or a lawyer, that probably would have made them much happier.
Right.
They were not buying into this start a business story.
Right.
So my wife, though, did support me. She did. Just
did.
like Lissa supported you here. So there's something to be said. That's
Yeah.
another piece of advice. Listen to your wife along the way.
Yeah, your significant
See,
other
we're giving
is important.
we're giving
It's half
tips.
your life.
We're giving nuggets.
We're giving great life tips.
Life tips.
Absolutely.
Parents, both of our parents were not necessarily in favor, but
No, I studied to
But
be a
the-
scientist. She goes, "What are you doing? You're going to take this $15
But our-
an hour job?"
but our respective spouses,
Yeah.
they could read the signs.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, she also, that's she was willing to take the risk as long as there was a time or an output, right?
Right,
If
right,
I think
right.
And candidly, too, I think the timing was good because we hadn't had that child yet.
Right.
If I had had a newborn and a 2-hour commute each way, I don't know. It's also, it kind of speaks to timing.
Right.
Sometimes it's just freaking timing. Like the timing.
Like going back to work-life balance. There's a timing aspect to where you're at in life. I mean, there'll be times in life you'll be if you've done the right things, you'll be able to have more of it. But it's a timing thing. Life is a lot about timing and multiple variables.
Yeah. So the timing is super important too. And you don't really have control of that. And something I tell people too is like there is an element of luck, right? Like you just sometimes it's just you happen to be at the right place at the right time, and fate or however you want to call it. There's this big sort of things that kind of guide you along the way, and
Clark and I had no idea that the single family REITs were going out and buying homes.
So sometimes it just happens.
But it was a perfect solution for that problem, especially when single family, you're buying 10,000 homes, you need to let people in.
I feel like me and you especially, there's a lot of you got to grind, right? I mean, I remember one of the scariest things for me starting at Rentley, like I mentioned, was the cold call.
Right.
And but to your credit, you were super transparent. You're like, hey, just so you know, your first day you're gonna make a call.
Right.
You were like dipping your toe in the fire a little bit. There was support obviously beforehand, but I remember. And now thinking back on those days, they were fun, right? And they were simpler in a way.
The first sign and tell of whether or not success is coming or fading is whether or not the folks that are running an operation are still grinding.
Yeah,
and it's obvious. I mean, you could tell when somebody's still grinding and they're not. And we went to the what was the event at Spencer's place?
Yeah, we went to go visit. We did some filming. Maybe we could splice in some footage. We did actually for the audience. We did when we were sort of starting to think about OpsTalks and starting to conceptualize it. One of the things that me and you did, and this was fun because I turned the camera on. Merrick's like, "What the heck are you doing?" Because we were hopping.
You caught me by surprise.
I caught you by surprise because I remember we were driving to Spencer Raskoff's house
for Tech Week LA.
Yeah, for Tech Week LA, one of the co-founders of Zillow.
But what I was gonna say is he's still grinding.
Oh, and you can tell.
And he's not like he just keeps grinding. But then you see people, in kind of to contrast that they reach a certain point and they're just on the golf course.
Right.
It's like, okay, you're on the golf course. Right. You're going to be on the golf course a lot now.
I mean, you could tell, to Spencer's credit, he's still starting up companies. He's hosting events. He's teaching at Harvard. He's doing all this stuff.
100%.
You could tell, to your point, you can tell exactly
He's on.
You can tell from our customers or clients. He's got a good run ahead of him. Yeah,
he's got a good run ahead of him.
Yeah,
and it's not like we're that close. I mean, we're just, we've cordially met a few times, but you could tell he's got a nice decade ahead.
And I feel like when you meet kind of the people that have been successful in our space, you always get that energy. Like we met quite a few people that have had a lot of success in our industry. And every time I engage or meet with them, they are not at the golf course. They are thinking about the next thing. What am I building? And at that point, it's not even about money anymore. It's like just about winning. Right. The money is like a output.
Well, it
doesn't drive. It's just a scorecard. Exactly. It's not like, and that's one of the more interesting things I've learned is really successful people. And this is something that I sort of learned too. It's really interesting when you start learning, when you really start seeing successful people, it's not that they go, okay, I mean, maybe some go, okay, how much money can I earn and how do I get there? It's like, I really want to do this thing and I want to do it well. And then the money kind of comes, right? And I feel like that's a hallmark of not to say that I've met a ton of successful people. I'm not hanging out with billionaires left and right, like maybe one or two met. But everyone is always thinking about the next thing. And it's like, it's not like you need the money, right? It's not like you need to live more comfortably. It's like, what else can I do?
Right.
And I would say if you're kind of tying back to the theme of if you're watching this to like wonder if you're approaching it as I want to make a lot of money, therefore start my own business. It really should be the inverse. Like, how do I really start something? Obviously, the output is you obviously want to make money, but that's not the first thing you think about. It's I want to make something so successful. Here's a huge problem in the space. I'm going to fix it. By the way, I'm going to be the best, and therefore I will make money. Kind of thing.
I mean, the complexity of the human mind really fascinates me because I do think a lot of people do start out with that fantasy of, I want to make a lot of money. And there were certainly parts of me that were influenced that way in the
Sure.
early days, right? So, I want to be an entrepreneur, make a business, and make a lot of money. It's like my
Want to
13-year-old,
be independent.
right? My 13-year-old
Yeah.
son's like, I want to figure out how to make a lot of money quick in 2 years. How do I do that, Dad?
Right.
My son's Ben's asking me last night for the first time after 13 years. And, oh, great, he's got some ambition that he's waking up to, and I like that. I said, well, if you want to make it real quick, go to Wall Street, be an investment banker, and make some trades and try to turn. But that, that's what I said to him. But, going back to the complexity of the human mind, I mean, I think a lot of people start their journey with maybe one kind of goal and they evolve, right? So for me, maybe money was more of, and obviously, thank God I'm very comfortable with just living day to day now, but it becomes less, less of an important thing with time, right? After a decade plus, it's like I don't go to sleep thinking, oh, what big buyer could buy Rentley, and I could just, I don't even know what I would do, candidly. It's like, what would I do? I don't think about it. It's not on my mind.
You'd probably start another thing. You're not going to stop.
Probably. I don't know if I couldn't
My wife tells me that.
I couldn't start on,
She goes, you're not going to stop.
I couldn't sit on a golf course, that's for sure.
What are you going to do?
I couldn't sit on a golf course.
You're not going to sit on, no, of course not.
No.
It's going to be, what's the next thing? What's the next journey?
You got to stay busy. You got to keep the mind going so that...
you're not stopping.
Yeah, well, nor are you, as your wife said. Wives know, but
they know.
but people are interesting. They kind of evolve. I mean, it's interesting too. It's like I'm reading the book Supremacy about the evolution of Google and ChatGPT.
Oh, okay.
And DeepMind with Demis Hassabis and Sam Altman, and it's interesting because when Google's model was what was it? Don't do evil. Was that what it is?
Or don't be evil.
Don't be evil.
Yeah,
right?
Don't be evil.
And then
I think they canned that.
They kind of canned it, and they're still
after about 6 years, they're like
whatever it is. It's like they're still 80%, 90% ad revenue driven now, right? Which is targeted user profiling for continued sales. And when DeepMind turned down their initial offer that they received and sold to Google for less because they wanted to stay independent, they wanted to have an ethics board, but over time it became part of Google's formal business unit more than ever before. And now we see that Sam Altman has moved from the OpenAI donation model to more of a business model. But the point being is humans are fascinating. I think it's really hard to tell and pinpoint specifically what an intention or motivation is because it really changes over time. But we were talking about, I think the get rich idea is one that's comes from a form of immaturity, and if you're doing the right things and progressing well in life, that progressively should be less important because you'll situationally see life improve as a result of hard work, and then you'll just want to do more hard work because it's meaningful.
Any final thoughts that you would have for viewers out there? Anything that's if someone is watching this and obviously you've given a lot of nuggets about how you've built a company and how you have been successful.
Right.
Any other last words of advice or tokens of wisdom or?
The biggest thing I would impart if I had to close around building a business and the way for somebody who's getting started, whether it's in PropTech or elsewhere, to know whether what they're pursuing is right for them is how strong is your willpower to complete it. If you're willing to sacrifice everything for it, you probably should pursue it. If you're not, you don't really want it. Going back, I mean, starting Rentley, literally I had 2 kids at the time. I was married, and I came sometimes real short, real close to being short on rent.
Yeah.
But it didn't faze me at all.
Yeah.
You want to, if the willpower is a very strong thing. Willpower. And it's a barometer of whether something's meant to be or not.
Good lesson. You get 30 seconds, talk about anything Rentley related. What's the most exciting thing that you want to pitch to the audience about Rentley? 30 seconds before we close out.
Super excited about our access panels that are coming to market. With the introduction of the access panel, Rentley now has the complete suite of hardware that's needed in any situation to facilitate access. We've got locks for the front door. We've got the smart home hub that controls everything in the home. Yeah. We've got the access panels at the front of the community or built-to-rent community that can let people in. There's no access component that's not covered now.
And the access panel also has intercom functionality.
Exactly. So you can buzz in your colleagues, friends from your unit or home.
There you go.
On the camera, on the intercom.
Awesome. All-in-one hardware solution. And Merrick, I want to thank you for, your busy schedule, taking the time to have our Ops Talk. It's an honor to have you.
Appreciate you making the time.
Every time we talk, by the way, known you for 10 years now, and I learn a new little nugget of information about the stories I thought I heard before, but there's always some new factoid you tell me. So appreciate you being an entertaining guest, and really looking forward to seeing our Ops Talks air, and it's going to get 1 million views.
Let's go see what we lost on our phone in the last hour. We haven't checked.
Let's go see what we lost on our phone. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one.